At the end here, we're going to cover commas. Commas seem to be a simple enough punctuation mark, and oftentimes people ask, well, where do the commas go? It seems to be a simple question. It's actually much more complicated because commas actually follow the rules of words, phrases, and clauses. If you don't understand words, phrases, and clauses as the building blocks for language, you would have a very hard time understanding where commas go. So if you've ever heard that refrain that commas go wherever there's a pause, that's not a very good rule. It's not very useful. The idea of a pause doesn't exist in writing. It exists in speech. And where I might pause in speech will be different than where you would pause in speech. So that's not a very useful rule to guide you to put commas in the right place. Commas actually are used for very logical reasons. In some cases, there is some wiggle room where some folks can use a comma in some places and other folks can choose not to. But in most cases, commas follow the guidelines of words, phrases, and clauses. So I'm going to go through commas over the next few videos, and you're going to see how this plays out. Some of these commas are very easy to learn, and you probably already knew them before you started the class. Some of them can be a little more challenging and a little more difficult, and with those you really do need to understand the logic of words, phrases, and clauses. If you do, you should be able to follow this. And then again, some of them will be a stylistic choice, and you'll get to decide how you want to do it, but you want to do it consistently and know what you're doing, and not just thinking there might be a comma here. Most people, when they're writing essays, lean on the side of put a comma rather than not to. But quite honestly, in some of the cases, you're going to have the choice. You want to know when you do. So with commas, what they do is they help the reader move along through the piece and make sense out of it. They're not necessarily there for pauses or anything else. They really help make sense. The first one to be aware of is the list. We use them in lists, such as the one we learned before, for parallels, apples, bananas, and pears. We put one in between apples and bananas because we use them in lists to separate the items. We separate items from each other, apples and bananas. Why we do this is actually very important, because what your mind does when it sees two words that are usually nouns next to each other, it will make one into an adjective for the next noun. If, for example, you look at the word chocolate, which we think of as a noun, chocolate's a noun. But if I put the noun next to it of milk, notice what your mind just did. It changed chocolate into an adjective modifying milk. It happens automatically. It turns this from a noun into an adjective. If I do this, you actually keep them as separate nouns. So even though you probably would not think apples, bananas as a single item and make apples into an adjective, your brain would try to do that at first before it figures out, no, these are separate items. So what you're really doing here is making it easier on the reader to follow one item to the next item, to the next item. That's what you're doing, okay? So you need the comma here between apples and bananas. Leaving it out would be a definite error. Now, the one that is questionable, and is up to you, is whether or not you would use a comma here, after bananas, but before pears. There is the end in here, so there's no real risk of, making bananas into an adjective for pears. Nobody would do that. They're not next to each other. Where's what the rule is, and it's not much of a rule. It's called a Harvard comma. If you're going to use it in front of the third item or the fourth item, or whenever you have an end, you need to use it consistently. You need to use it consistently each and every time. But right now, I'll tell you at this day and age, most magazines and newspapers, in fact almost all of them, do not use it. Really, you see this mostly in books before 1960 or 1950. You'll see it consistently used. I would say it depends on which audience you're writing for. If you're writing for an older audience that might be over 40 or 50 years old, I would probably lean towards using it. If you're writing for a younger audience, I would lean away from using it. It is, however, in the end, your choice. It has become a stylistic choice whether or not to use it. Personally, I don't use it. That's my choice. But I know a number of teachers who do use it. It's up to you in the end, but you just want to use it consistently for the list. So the list is an easy one that happens to be very, very important, and you want to make sure you use it correctly. Okay? The next one are with introductory words. These are, in fact, adverbs. The words to watch out for are words like consequently, meanwhile, further, furthermore, therefore, however, instead, and otherwise. Those are the most common, what are called conjunctive adverbs. You don't really need to remember the term conjunctive adverbs. You just need to be familiar with this list of words. They get confused with subordinating conjunctions. They often get confused with subordinating conjunctions. And you might look at a word like however, which is frequently confused with a subordinating conjunction. It means pretty much the same thing as although. Although is a subordinating conjunction, however is a conjunctive adverb. How do you know the difference, and how would you separate them? Remember, with adverbs, they can move throughout the sentence, and they can move from one place to another to another. And if you look at each one of these words, whenever they're used in a sentence, they can be moved from the beginning to the middle to the end. I could have a sentence, however, George went to the party at 8 o'clock. Or I could change it to, George, however, went to the party at 8 o'clock. George went to the party at 8 o'clock, however. Notice how however can move throughout the sentence. That makes it an adverb. And the type of adverb it is a conjunctive adverb because it joins the sense of one sentence to the previous sentence. But it does not link it grammatically. That's what subordinating conjunctions do. Subordinating conjunctions create those dependent clauses. Conjunctive adverbs do not. They could be taken out and the sentence can work just fine. So they are not subordinating conjunctions. They can move throughout a sentence. Subordinating conjunctions cannot do that. They have to remain in their place. If they move, they must bring their entire clause with them. The entire dependent clause that they created must come with them to the front of the sentence or to the back of the sentence. These conjunctive adverbs, they can move by themselves throughout the sentence. So again, they sound a lot like subordinating conjunctions. They're not. And you can see, and consequently, it has the ly in the end. That's a giveaway that it's an adverb. But its close cousins here are meanwhile, furthermore, therefore, however, instead, and otherwise. All of these words, when they are the first word in a sentence, need a comma right after them. Okay? That rule, I will tell you, is often violated, but I would encourage you in a standard written English context to use that comma after one of these words. I do, however, see it violated a little too often. Educated people will often recognize this in the writing of other educated people if it's not used correctly. So I would encourage you to always follow it when it's the introductory word. Use a comma immediately after it. Take care.